My name is Mariette DiCristina, and I'm the Dean of the College of Communication here at Boston University. I'm also a COM alum myself and the parent of a recent BU grad. Today's event asks the question, political ads, what do candidates get for $1 billion? The question raises a second one for me and maybe for you too. What do voters get in the deal? That might be an event for another day. In any case, all that money is paying for a lot of ads this election year. And if a device has a screen, a candidate has put an ad on it. To understand the strategy and creativity behind it all, we've assembled a great panel of experts from the Boston University community. And now it's my pleasure to introduce them to you. Chris Moyer is a progressive communications strategist who's worked on campaigns at every level, from presidential to mayoral, including the former Boston Mayor Tom Menino, former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, and US Senator Cory Booker. Chris is a 2009 COM grad and lives in Washington, D.C. area. Welcome to you, Chris.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's awesome to have you. Now I'd like to introduce Matthew Felling. As a prospective student, Matthew Felling skipped his Boston University campus tour to attend a gubernatorial campaign rally, and he's been involved in politics ever since. In these partisan times, excuse me, he's distinguished himself as someone who works across the parties. He served as a senior advisor for both a Republican and an independent who caucuses with Democrats. Today, he's Strategic Communications Director for Senator Angus King of Maine. Matt did choose BU, by the way, graduating from COM in 1996. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, no problem. Thank you very much for having me. And greetings from Hart Senate Office Building, where there's other Q&As happening down the hall of a slightly different caliber, but hopefully this will generate a little bit more light than heat.
Looking sharp. Moving along now, let's say hello to Ann Danahy, who is senior lecturer here at COM. She started her career as a political pollster and studied under Burns Roper, the former president of the Roper organization. Ann has been a pollster and strategic consultant to various political organizations and candidates running for public office. Her clients have included mayors, governors, US senators, and US representatives. She's also served as the pollster for WCVB Channel 5, conducting media polls. Hi there, Ann.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining. Rounding out our panel of experts, I'd like to introduce Toby Berkowitz, who is an associate professor of advertising here at COM. He's worked since 1974 as a political media consultant on presidential, senatorial, congressional, and gubernatorial election campaigns. He specialized in media strategy and time buying and worked as a producer of political commercials. His clients have included Senators John Glenn, Carl Levin, Patrick Leahy, and Tom Harkin. So glad to have you, Toby.
Thank you, Mariette.
Now it's my pleasure to pass the mic over to Bert Glass, COM's Marketing and Communications Director, who's going to be moderating today's discussion. Over to you, Bert, and thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Mariette. And thank you, the panel, again, for participating in this afternoon's discussion. I hope it's lively. I think we're going to look at some real ads and hear your comments about them and hopefully then field some questions. But before we do, I'd just like to kind of get our orientation and context set with just a few questions for the panel, just to kind of get things going. And my first question is for Ann. And I'm interested in knowing, how does a campaign choose the focus of a specific ad?
Sure. So choosing what to focus on is typically based on polling. So polling helps to determine the message as well as the target audience. So for example, if you're challenging an incumbent and you're fairly unknown, and to boot, you're unpopular among those voters who do know you, we might suggest that your first ad be a soft piece aimed at increasing name recognition and making people like you, increasing your favorability rather than attacking the incumbent and saying what a terrible job the incumbent's doing. Because if people don't know who you are, you're not going to have the credibility. So another example is that your opponent starts attacking you on a particular issue and your first instinct is to fight back. But polling can help decide what strategy is best. Maybe that issue isn't really strongly correlated to voting behavior. In that case, it's probably best not to respond at all. So, yeah, the media polls always just show us the horse race, but it's really the strategy of really understanding the needs and the concerns and the priorities of voters and integrating that into your campaign strategy and your advertising strategy.
That's interesting. And it all sounds like a battle strategy that is fine until the first shot is fired. And so I have a question for Matthew about that is, how does one deliver that kind of focus, but through all the clutter that's out there, both other political ads and all just the chaos of a modern campaign?
Wait, are you asking me what creates a effective and impactful political ad? And how much time do we have here?
Maybe just focus just on the clutter part. We'll get to the rest momentarily.
No, I understand. No, this is just one of the most difficult and shape-shifting questions that people are always being forced to answer every election cycle. And the tremendous truth here and the difficulty is that the definition of what cuts through clutter, it used to change every 2 years. It used to, back in Toby's day, it used to change every 4 years. Then, things sped up a little bit. Yeah, Toby's waving. And Toby will talk about the Daisy ad for as long as you want him to, by the way. But what cuts through the clutter right now, the definition changes month to month because new things are being tried, new experiments and new advertising can be, given a go, and we'll see what works. There still are the old definitions of what works in news. And what I've been particularly fascinated by is that a new brand, a new category of ad has emerged this cycle. But there's branding, there is the campaign ad that tells you how to feel, what to think, the emotional heartstrings and what that person's overall profile is, patriot, uniter, job creator, making America great. Then you have the attack ad, which has been in effect and very impactful and useful for about 100 years now. This candidate would like you to think that he or she has always felt this way, but did you know about this vote in 2003? Or did you know that he used to do this in his free time? Those ads are great in terms of cutting your opponent down a peg. In the digital age, we've actually seen a new sort of ad created, which is just a buzz generator or a chatter creator, where it is strictly a clever ad that is designed to, get people talking. It's not really supposed to change a voter's behavior as much as it's just sort of designed to gain earned media so that Joe and Mika are laughing about it tomorrow morning on Morning Joe. But as I mentioned earlier, a new type of ad has emerged this cycle, which is fascinating because it's an ad that, for lack of a better term, is just strictly there to remind you. And strictly there to put a hand on your shoulder and say, you remember that time? A month ago, we were talking about the Woodward book. 3 weeks ago, we were talking about tax returns. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about Proud Boys and a coronavirus diagnosis. These are ads, the reminder ads are the ones that acknowledge that we are all living through 30 different news cycles in a single week. And they basically say, there was that time a couple of years ago that really something either got to you or pleased you. And let's just remember that. Let's just isolate that moment in time and think about it for a minute. Because that is what is still going to motivate people to get out and vote, to go out and walk and vote early, or to put that mail-in ballot into their mailbox. And I think those reminder ads have been particularly effective and pronounced because we are caught up in so much. And we are constantly just dizzied and drowning in information. And those have been the ones that have stuck with me.
That's great. And when you describe all those different types and the content, you alluded to, especially the last two, Matthew, about the kind of the delivery method, which is a big change. And so I want to turn to Toby real quick, because you've had experience buying, buying media, deciding where the money goes as well as the content. So I have a simple question for you. In 2020, Toby, what's hotter, social media or television?
Both. How's that for a hedge? But it is true. The fact is that the attention is paid to social media because it speaks to individuals. I can have a message to Matt. I can have a message to Anne, Mariette, that's very well honed to their interests. What have they been looking on Facebook or Twitter? And then we can go right at them. So it's very individual. It's also very engaging. We want them to get back to us and to converse with their friends and things like that. Television is very different. We're talking tonnage. How can you reach lots and lots of people, which is very different from trying to reach individuals, which can then turn into a lot of people. But this is going after lots and lots of eyeballs right to begin with. The big question is, besides eyeballs, what does it get you? And we'll be taking a look at that very soon. What television can do, because you have so much high impact aesthetics, it tends to be on a larger screen, tends to have a little better sound. So you can pull emotion very, very effectively with that. And I think Matt was sort of alluding to some of these types of things. But you can also target certain types of key voters, undecided voters. Right now in the presidential election across America, there are 10 undecided voters, and you can probably reach all of them. But on a serious note, we've got Senate races, House races, governor's races, where when you look at the polling, the undecided can be 7%, 12%. And this reaches people who aren't very interested in politics per se. We call them low interest voters. And you reach them because they're not looking for content. The content finds them and then can have some impact on them. Also what we call persuadable voters, voters who can be moved from one candidate to another. Sure, in this presidential election, there's not a lot of them, but you look at Senate races, you look at House races, there are a lot of voters who you can sometimes shift one way or the other, and TV advertising can do that. And it reaches what we're just calling these low interest voters, people who care more about, how is my kid going to do sitting in a Zoom class than what's going on in terms of legislation in Washington, unless it affects me personally. And so this is a good way to reach them. Each has its use. It depends what specifically is your goal, what's your strategy, what type of content is going to work, and then what kind of money do you have? And then these are all strategic decisions.
I see. So I've left the toughest question for Chris at the end, just kind of, and maybe this is the ultimate question, is that I was wondering in 2020, whether it's the content or the delivery system or anything else, if there's a hot political trend that has caught your eye or that you see as new on the scene?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer that I would give is that there's these influencer programs, particularly on Instagram, where there are actually companies that find folks for you, or you can work on identifying it yourself as a campaign. People who have a large following, who live in the state that you're competing in your districts, whatever it may be, and then having them convey a message that comes across in a very authentic way that can actually be more effective than the flood of political advertising that we get on every device. So this is a pretty new, it's been used more in like the product space for businesses, but it's starting to emerge in the political space in campaigns as a really important tool that can authentically deliver a message. And when you're trying to be, that authenticity is really important.
Great, thank you. Well, I'd like to watch some political ads because we certainly haven't seen enough this fall, and hear what you have to say. So give me a second. I'm going to show you the first ad, kind of cue it up here. Great. So this first ad is from a close race from an incumbent, Senator Collins in Maine. And here we go. And we'll talk about it on the backside.
A deadly attack and a call for the leadership to enact historic bipartisan intelligence reforms that have made us safer. An epic hurricane and the investigations that provided urgent help to the desperate and strengthened America's emergency response. A partisan government shutdown, an impasse only the most bipartisan senator could lead us out of. And she did. She led the fight that secured Medicare for our seniors. She was the deciding vote to protect patients with pre-existing conditions. And during this devastating pandemic, with our economy in the balance, she crafted a response which protected 250,000 Maine jobs. Through it all, she leads She cares. She delivers for Maine and America in the moments that matter.
I'm Susan Collins, and I've approved this message.
A deadly attack. And a call for the leadership to enact historic bipartisan.
Great. So I'd like to ask, I don't know, Anne, what was your take on that ad, and how would you describe that strategy that you might see behind it?
So whenever I look at ads, I guess because I've done polling for so long, I always look at it and say, oh, that's what their polling says. So I think that, you know, she has been accused of being duplicitous, and she calls it by being bipartisan. So I thought that that was an interesting way to her kind of trying to change her negatives. She also has been criticized about her vote on healthcare and part of the issue with her duplicity. But she mentions healthcare and talks about protecting pre-existing condition. And she addresses the issue that the high negatives that Congress has and the gridlock that people feel like nothing effective is getting done. We need an outsider. She is trying to portray herself as a champion of somebody who's really been able to make change, somebody who cares about people. She's creating that emotional bond with voters. She's trying to be an agent of change that's, you know, working kind of, is being effective, and that she's bipartisan and can work with both parties, so that trying to inoculate herself against the criticism that she has been duplicitous.
Interesting. So Chris, I'm interested in your take, and maybe take off your partisan hat for a moment and look at it with the cold analysis of whether this was effective, or anything else that you saw through.
Yeah, so I think this is a good ad. It really tries to remind voters in Maine why they have liked her and voted her into office for several terms. It's because of her bipartisanship. It just fits for me. The problem is the Democrats have been making the argument in the state that was Susan Collins then, but she's changed. And that is not Susan Collins today. And they point to a number of votes during the Trump era, such as for Judge Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh, tax bill, others. And the only problem is that a lot of the things that she mentions were a really long time ago, relatively speaking. 9/11, 19 years ago, Katrina, 15 years ago. And then the things that she talks about that are more recent, like the Paycheck Protection Program, that has not been without its share of problems. And we're also not out of the pandemic yet. So kind of claiming victory on that front may ring hollow for those who are still at home with kids in school at home, not being able to work. The reality of their life situation may not match up. So I don't think it's a bad ad. Like Ann said, it fits her polling, I'm sure. And this is probably the best strategic move for her at this point in the campaign.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to go to all the way across the country, about as far away as you can get from Maine, and check out this one from Alaska. And we'll talk about it on the flip side.
He was
Did you hear that okay?
Born in the wake of an avalanche, bought his first fishing boat with a bank loan at age 14. Piloted through an ocean gale with Governor Jay Hammond, father of the Permanent Fund, down below. And killed a grizzly bear in self-defense after it snuck up on him. He sailed the South Pacific, prospected for gold, and worked his way through college and medical school as a commercial fisherman. A renowned orthopedic surgeon, he left his practice to study solutions for fixing Alaska's healthcare system. Now, at a time when Alaska needs a leader who doesn't vote the party line, he's running for U.S. Senate as an independent Alaskan.
Dan Sullivan's voted with his party 97% of the time. Out here, if you can't think for yourself, you won't survive. I'm Al Gross, and I approve this message.
Dr. Al Gross for U.S. Senate. Always Alaska.
All right, let's go to our resident independent, Matthew. Also, you have some Alaska experience yourself, so you can comment on this maybe from two angles.
Yeah, I have to tell you that as a former local TV anchor and broadcaster in Alaska, seeing political ads brings this weird sort of every even year PTSD into my soul and the core of my being, because we used to just be pelted by this all the time, because Alaska is a very fascinating state, and Alaska's political spectrum is basically, you think of the spectrum as being left versus right, but in Alaska, it's one of the weird states where it's actually a burrito where the spectrum folds over on itself, where the lefties and the righties are both so anti-government that they just start to like sound and talk like one another. But what I think this candidate's, first of all, it is a slick ad. It is a gorgeous looking ad. The production values are enormous. And I think it's appropriate that he was out on the water in the Gulf of Alaska, or maybe Bering Sea, because what the challenge is for this candidate is he's trying to boil the ocean. He's trying to say, none of you have heard about me. None of you really know me by name because I'm a newcomer to this scene. So let me just give you my entire biography in 60 seconds or less. That's a huge challenge to surmount. But Alaskans love being considered independent. So he hit that home over and over and over again. He talked about his life on the sea. He talked about how tough he is. I think I mentioned earlier, there's always the core essence of an advertisement is branding and the tone and the feel and the vibe you're supposed to pick up from an advertisement. And this, you get independent, thinks for himself, outside the box. And we really don't hear a whole lot of policy arguments, as opposed to what we saw with the Susan Collins ad, where, because he doesn't have any political voting record to stand on, he's just basically saying, these are the values that I'll take with me to Washington, D.C. if you vote for me as your independent senator. And we'll see how that goes. I understand from just observing this from afar that he's presenting a larger challenge than you would expect for an incumbent like Dan Sullivan. At the same time, though, I think this ad, high production value, effective communication of a biography. I'd be interested to see the wider spectrum of what he has been trying to communicate. Like, here's my 3-point plan for Alaska in DC. Here are the things that I'm going to try to get done. I'm sure that that's part of his ad campaign, but this was, in terms of a splash, in terms of introducing himself, it got the job done.
Mm-hmm. Toby, you got thoughts on this one? This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, Matt's obviously the Alaska expert here. As I watched this, it sort of seemed like the cross between an action video and an ad for the Discovery Channel. It had that look like, the Deadliest Catch or something like that. As Matt pointed out, I mean, beautiful production value. Well shot, well edited. He's very good on camera. And one of the things you learn when you're working as a political consultant is some candidates are good on camera and some aren't. And when you get a good one, it makes life a lot easier. My favorite was, the Davy Crockett part of the ad, because he killed a grizzly bear, which in many parts of America would be like a no-no. And you lose half the voters. Oh, you killed a bear. But this is Alaska, so that's a little different. And I think it's a combination of experience, real experience, adventure, and I think, as Matt also pointed out, this whole idea of think for yourself really resonates with those types of voters, and especially if you're running as an independent.
Right.
Let me just jump into that really quick with regards to the bear abuse scandal claim by Toby Berkowitz. Just to let you know that the first month when I lived in Alaska, I actually had to call into my office and tell them that I was going to be late because I was parked in by a moose. And they acted like it was no big deal, because that's just the way life is up there. So I think the bear message communicates very differently to this target demographic than us coastal elites.
No, exactly. And what makes this such a successful ad is it speaks to that Alaskan spirit of independence, and, sort of reveling in the sea and the outdoors. So, I was tongue in cheek about the bear. I wouldn't do that probably in Connecticut, but you can get away, but certainly in Alaska that works.
Great, thank you. All right, let's go move on to a number 3 in our parade.
Did you know Kelly Lefler was ranked the most conservative senator in America?
Yep, she's more conservative than Attila the Hun.
Fight China. Got it. Attack big government.
Yeah. Eliminate the liberal scribes.
More conservative than Attila the Hun.
Uh-oh.
Kelly Lefler, 100% Trump voting record.
I'm Kelly Lefler. I approve this message.
Okay. Let's see who gets this one first. Chris, I can tell you're chomping at the bit to talk about the Senate race in Georgia. Do you think polling was done before this one?
If they specifically asked about that subject matter, and I don't know. This is a really interesting race in Georgia. There's 2 Senate races going on in the state right now. And Georgia has this runoff system where if no candidate gets 50%, then the top 2 face each other. And we could be looking at January 5th having maybe 2 Senate races in a runoff. Kelly Lefler is in a real fight for the most conservative voters in Georgia. And so they're fighting to be the biggest friend to Donald Trump. And that's why you saw the messaging on China, some of the other points that she made. This definitely I remember this getting attention when it came out. I don't know if it was all good attention, but the overall issue that I think she has is she owns a WNBA team and the players on that team are urging people not to vote for her. And she was brought in, she was appointed to be this more moderate, suburban friendly candidate. And as this race has been competitive with Doug Collins, against whom she's running, she's gone further and further right. And I think this ad is indicative of the shift that she's had to make. And then that makes it harder for her in the general election, potentially to win the votes that she needs.
Toby, you got a thought about this one? I don't think the production values were quite as high as we've seen previously.
Yeah, no, I like this a lot. You go right from a couch potato to Monty Python, sort of in one transitional cut. Again, you know, we're talking about breaking through the clutter. This is a clutter buster. You know, people are going to talk about it for better or for worse, and that's sometimes one of your strategies. I've worked for several consultants who really love to push the envelope and do these types of ads, hopefully with a little defter touch than that. But, you know, it's a way to force yourself and let everybody know who you are, what you stand for, you know, and a little clever payoff, killing the liberal scribes. Everyone supports that, who's going to vote for her. So, you know, it probably achieved what she wants. Chris's point is well taken. Depends who you're running against. It depends when you're running. If you're trying to get sort of suburban swing voters, probably, you know, unless they are Huns, you're just not going to get that vote.
All right. The Hun vote up for grabs there.
Yeah, it's a big one down there.
It's a big one. All right. Thank you. Here's number 4 on our list. Hold on a second. See what you think about this one, a little closer to home.
There's an invisible contract we all signed at birth, a promise. Every hour we work means longer days of freedom and security. It paved the road in your neighborhoods, and it added up to a country. But when crisis hit, Trump's government abandoned America. We asked what we could do for our country. They looked for what they could take. But there's a truth written in every history book. If you break the sacred contract, the people make a revolution. All across America, the essential people are demanding a new deal. Well, they call me the deal maker.
Ed Markey's desk was thrown out in the hall by the State House bosses. Markey's bill is now the law.
I'm Ed Markey. I'm running for Congress because I want to fight for the principles that I believe in. The bosses may tell me where to sit. No one tells me where to stand.
My father was a union leader. He taught me, don't beg for your rights, organize and take them. So in January, I was the first senator to write to Trump. I warned him we needed a plan. I talked to the Democrats and the Republicans. I told them we've got to save the fishermen. A month later, we had $300 million for our fishing industry. Trump wanted to cheap out, but I helped negotiate $600 a week for any American struggling to find their next gig. They thought the son of a milkman couldn't learn the rules. I made new ones. I don't need to get on the phone and talk to lobbyists to know what working people think. I get on the streets and I listen.
I've got a question for 1 million people. Do you want to freeze the arms race?
I put the deal on the table, but the people make it impossible to refuse. With 500 laws on the books, you think I'm going to stop now? They wish.
Green New Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey introduced their Green New Deal
to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process.
We got to absolutely crush Donald Trump in November. But if we're going to end this era of chaos, that won't be enough. We got to make sure President Biden signs the Green New Deal. We can't wait.
You got to have folks in the United States Senate who are willing to stand up for working people. That's who Ed Markey is. I need Ed Markey in the United States Senate.
We asked what we could do for our country. We went out. We did it. With all due respect, it's time to start asking what your country can do for you.
Well, what do you think, Matthew?
I mean,
it was a long one. Why was it so long? And what was he talking about?
Well, I think he had a checklist of things that he really wanted to get through to people. He wanted to communicate to young viewers. He wanted to communicate to the people who remember him from back in the day when he was just the son of a milkman. I thought that what he did with regards, I thought that the music choice was a curious decision in terms of, you know, the contrast between leaning on what sounded like a Woodstock documentary and then also splicing that with some AOC footage. Perhaps it's the best of both worlds because you get to show that you're the bridge between two eras. I loved the turn of phrase using Kennedy's words at the beginning of the ad and at the end of the ad. That was very powerful. And everybody in Massachusetts who as soon as they're out of diapers, they know the collected works of all the Kennedy speeches. So that really hits home, and it's really smart of him to do. Humble, it shows his track record. It showed the footage, which sort of looked like it was outtakes from The Departed, because he sort of worked a lot of the old Boston Brahmin in there. And he, what was also effective was, here we are in this era, a couple of people have referred to gridlock. He talked about having 500 laws on the books or 500 bills that have passed. That's a big number. And that shows that he's not only in Washington, D.C., but he's gotten some things done. There's a lot of people who are here for a long time and don't get dozens through the process. But this is a guy with a track record. And I think he clearly wants to show that not only is he a guy who's been a man of action in the past, gotten things done, he's got these endorsements, but he's also got his eye on the future. And that's where we take it back to AOC and him talking about the Green New Deal. I think it really does cover the waterfront, including the fishermen. But I thought I think there's something for everybody, which is good. But maybe if you're trying to do too much, you're trying to communicate too much, does that dilute it? I thought it was effective, but it was my first time seeing it as a guy down here in the Middle Atlantic instead of New England. I thought it was a very useful ad. I don't know where this sort of thing would play. It certainly isn't a 30-second. Maybe they sort of cut it during the local newscasts, but it's good. It'll get a view out of everybody who he needs to get a view during the election cycle.
Yeah. And what do you think? I mean, just to Matthew's point there, if a 3.5-minute ad is unlikely to air, what's the point of this? Of making something like this? Like, how do you get it to someone? Who's it for exactly?
Well, he did do the shorter version of that ad for TV, but I think that this ad was designed to get young voters. I think that he really needed to get young voters away from Joe Kennedy, and I think he did it really well. If you look at the ad, there are no old people in the ad. Everybody in that ad is young. Mm-hmm. And I think he kind of appealed to younger voters. He also made himself, he had AOC. I think AOC in the ad was a huge, huge help for him in terms of persuading younger voters. And I thought his ad, he hit it, anti-Trump, he hit that. Being a maverick, going against the gridlock in Congress, he hit on that point. He contrasted himself with Kennedy, because if you're a young voter, there's young Kennedy and there's old Ed Markey, who has been in Congress for a really long time, but he made himself seem like he was this, fresh face in Congress, because he was, and that he's been working the grounds. He was able to, I think he was able to kind of show, I guess undermine Joe Kennedy, but he did it without ever mentioning Joe Kennedy. But he talked about one of Joe Kennedy's big thing was that I'm on the street being with voters. And he took that over. Markey took that over and said, I don't need to be calling my lobbyists to know what working people think. I get on the streets. Yeah. That's kind of, I think, a slam against Kennedy. He's the son of a milkman. Again, a slam against Kennedy. And I think that the reason that we saw those scenes that seemed like kind of from The Departed was because it was the whole idea of being like a person of the people. I grew up, in Malden in a working class family. I hear you, I know you, I work for you. And I think it was really a good way for him to get young people.
Mm-hmm. I mean, looking at that made me think he was kind of pulling a page from Bernie Sanders. He was so old, he's new, yeah. And that and the haircut. Anyway, on to our final one. I'm going to ask you all of our panel to weigh in on this one. This is the mega finale one. See what you think. It too is long for a campaign ad.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it, will be to save Texas. To do so, you must recruit an exceptional team of congressional candidates. They must be courageous, patriotic, and absolutely fearless. Time is of the essence. The nation's future is dependent upon your success.
Still know how to fly one of these things?
Dan Crenshaw.
I'm putting a team together, Wesley. You in?
You know I wouldn't miss this for the world, right? Wait. I think August is going to want to come too.
You guys looking for a real pilot? Let me get cleaned up.
You're an F-22 pilot. What were you doing working under a helicopter?
I have no idea what I was doing, but typical Air Force fixing the Army's problems.
This guy, Dan, bro, you could have just texted me, man. Why you gotta jump out of an airplane instead of way easier?
Because it's cooler to jump. Never mind.
And I want to thank these officers for a job well done.
Hey, Beth, when you're finished over there, Texas could use your help.
What the?
Hey, Tony. Texas has a better use for your talents.
Hey guys, who's next?
No.
I got this.
All right, that was our grand finale. Who would like to comment on the Avengers of campaign ads? That was a joint ad. Toby,
Yeah,
what do you think about that?
I'm going to grab that because the four of us are going to do an ad just like that as the pundits, and we'll go from there. What a lot of fun. I mean, you know, part Matrix, part Mission Impossible, obviously tightly targeted to a very specific type of voter and viewer. And, you know, how serious is this? I don't know, but it certainly gets your attention. And for what they're trying to do, which is generate conservative voters to all get with the program here, I think it does that pretty effectively.
I'm going to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
I think the title of this event that we're all part of right now is, what does $1 billion get you in terms of advertising? Well, here's your answer. Like, at least half of that $1 billion probably went into making this movie. I don't know exactly how. I mean, what Toby mentioned, the low interest voters at the very outset, and how they were a vital battleground in terms of, like, these are people who aren't watching the cable newscasts every night. These are people who are, you know, watching baseball games, watching football games, and not at all tuned in to, you know, the claptrap that we all listen to and watch every day. So this grabs them and brings them in. What I found very interesting is that clearly there is a new star in Texas politics, and it's Dan Crenshaw. Being slightly familiar with him, I know that he's really carved out a signature for himself, and he's really grabbed a lot of momentum and become a center of gravity for young veteran conservatives on Capitol Hill. But the fact that he can associate himself with this handful of, you know, we'll call it the A team, or call it getting the band back together, it really starts to extend his brand to these people. And it sort of creates a godfather of a conservative, young veteran conservative politics in Texas that I find fascinating. It should be something for us to keep an eye out for in the years and election cycles to come. But yeah, this was another ad that was just a whole lot of a lot. I don't think it communicated a whole lot about their stances. And I think that that was the point. I think that it just wanted to get people talking. It just wanted to get people aware of these people, because they've seen the guy with the eye patch and they like him. And, oh, if these are his friends, let's just all jump in, and they're the new Brat Pack.
Mm-hmm. I imagine they raised a good amount of money from this going viral, which it did. I don't know if it makes up for the production costs, but it certainly was, like, it got attention. It did the job on that regard.
And I think what Matt said about, you know, getting those voters who really don't pay attention, that, you know, we all think that everybody's sitting on the edge of their seats figuring out and analyzing who to vote for. Most voters aren't doing that. Most voters are, you know, not really that into it, but this was funny. It was entertaining. And then somebody who's not that into it, they might say, oh, you're going to vote? Yeah. Did you see that ad? Yeah, I'm voting for this person. And it just, they don't need a lot of depth. They don't need to know a lot about the candidates. It has appeal because, like Crenshaw, they heard he's a good guy. Oh yeah, I'm conservative, I'm gonna vote for them. And it helps to get that percentage of voter who really votes, but doesn't really care about knowing the intimate details about their policy positions.
Hey, can I tack something onto my comment from earlier?
Yeah,
I
Matthew, then Chris. Yeah.
Sure, and I apologize, Chris, but I find something interesting here that I just thought of listening to our conversation. If these people are low interest voters and they're not necessarily watching the cable newscasts, they're probably people who are very, very aware that they haven't seen a new movie in the multiplex since February. And this is fresh content. This is the new action film that they've been waiting for because they spent all summer sitting on their sofa watching, 30 for 30s and The Last Dance. And this is something new to be excited about. I think that there's something to be said for, this is the new action film that they've been waiting for.
Right.
Just to build off of an earlier good point that Matt made, he's made a lot of them, so it's hard to keep track. But, I don't think Dan Crenshaw is in a very competitive seat himself. So that stands out to me, that context. And so the fact that he's trying to bring these new candidates into the fold to try to win some of these seats. Texas, for the Democratic House Congressional Committee, is what California was last cycle. They're trying to really make inroads and add more Democrats to the delegation in the state. So this seems to be a counter effort to that. And Crenshaw is recruiting, it seems like he's recruiting these candidates and supporting them with some money that they probably got from this ad.
And one final thing, the Republicans need a counterpoint to AOC. Someone with a strong personality, a persona, unique, unafraid to take certain positions because, as was pointed out, it's a relatively safe seat. And so here could be a future counterpoint for the Republicans.
He didn't go to BU, though.
Well,
Thank you. That's we're going to end the movie watching now. So put away the popcorn, and we're going to turn to questions from our virtual audience. If you have a question but haven't submitted it yet, I just remind you can use the Q&A box to submit one, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. One question that was just submitted from Jerry, just a follow-up to that Crenshaw ad. Do you think that it was effective for Crenshaw himself, because it's not really clear that he was asking for a vote for anything? Or is that self-evident from that? He didn't say, vote for me, I'm running for Congress. Of course, he is every 2 years. Does it matter?
He's got bigger fish to fry, as I think has been pointed out.
Yeah. So there, it's interesting.
No, I think, if anything, it really creates this larger aura and larger brand for him as being the face of the godfather of this new conservative, young, veteran political movement. And it was a savvy move, given the fact that he could have just sat at home and, done a couple campaign stump speeches for people. But this visibility and getting these people, whether or not they win, he has created the brand for himself of being the focal point, the keystone of this young generation of conservative young Texans. So I think it was effective for him. I don't know what the results have been for the other people on the ad. Maybe they all went back to, playing Jim Cotta.
No. Here's another question from Howard. This kind of harkens back to how we started the conversation today about TV and not TV. Most of the ads, the money is going to TV ads, but in trying to reach young voters, and hopefully we have some on the call today, they're not watching TV in the same way. So is there a disconnect there, or is the stated objective of reaching young people just kind of false, and people are gonna fall back on TV because it reaches the tried and true older voter?
So if I could start with this, I think it really depends on where you are trying to get votes from. If you're in a state like New Hampshire or in Iowa, you have an older population, and older folks are going to be watching TV more often. And I don't think any campaign is running exclusively TV or digital or, it's all of the above. And so you just have to consider your electorate, and you skew the percentage of ads based on age, demographic, other factors. TV is still very powerful. I worked for a candidate for governor in New Hampshire a few years ago. She was an unknown state senator from a not very populous part of New Hampshire. And we went on TV for 2 weeks. And by the end of that 2-week period, everyone was coming up to her on the street saying, oh, I know you. And so, especially in these smaller states, you can really have more of an impact with TV.
Yeah, and it has such voters skew older generally than the population. So the targets usually are older, and you can reach them through TV. But digital, I mean, digital is growing by leaps and bounds, probably at a higher percentage increase than TV. But TV still accounts for, I don't know, Toby, you would know this, accounts for like 2/3 of the ad spendings on TV, right?
Well, it used to be that you'd go digital because it was inexpensive, but that's gone down the boards. You know, you run a really serious social media campaign with paid media, and that's going to cost you a fortune too. So that's been a big change. And I think, as has been pointed out, who's your target audience? What are you trying to do? What kind of resources do you have? And then you go from there. There's no one size fits all. And if you think that, you're probably going to be in trouble.
Great. We got another question. This one's from Bonnie. She writes, what are your thoughts on President Trump's recent ads that are blatant lies, often about one topic? And so just to kind of keep this nonpartisan, I mean, there have been, I mean, I think it's true that there's a lot of, let's see, shading of the truth in a lot of these ads. And this year, certainly we've seen a lot. So is that just tolerated now more, or is it just so effective that people don't care? What are people thinking about, you know, provable lies in these ads? You know, kind of do it and apologize later.
There is a process for having false ads taken down, and that, you know, opposition campaigns will go that route if it's really blatant. And also, but on the Trump ads in particular, you know, polling shows that most people don't find him to be a credible messenger. And so even when he's lying, there's so many to keep track of. And that's like not a partisan statement, but I'll let others jump in.
It also depends on, are you a federal candidate, and is it a bona fide candidate ad? That's why at the end it says paid for and authorized by, and you get what's called a candidate appearance. If you're doing that and you meet that criteria, there's pretty much nothing on broadcast that anyone can do. It's very different if you're dealing with social media. It's very different if you're an independent expenditure. It's different if you are a non-federal candidate. But if it's Toby for Congress and I say, hi, I'm Toby, I'm running for Congress, give me 29 more seconds, I can say whatever I want. And pretty much that's the deal, as long as it's on broadcast.
Interesting. And that's because it's a political speech and protected?
It's the way that federal law is written, unless it's changed since I've been doing that. And that was like when you had to crank electricity so that you could watch your television.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think what Mark Twain said like 100 years ago about a lie can make its way halfway around the world before the truth can get its boots on, it still holds true. I think that if a candidate wants to go up and shade the truth, and this happens on both sides. Yes, the question was about the president, but if you want to selectively edit or selectively choose things, topics and votes or issues, the people who you are trying to go for are the low interest, low information voter, not the people who also pick up the newspaper in the morning or watch cable TV and say, I'm going to watch Ad Watch and I'm going to see the Truth Buster segment on this. I think what they're just trying to do is move the needle just a little bit. And we've seen some of this migrate to social media where a lot of the misinformation and disinformation is right now. But it still, pops up on the TV stations in the local markets because, if you look at every local newscast is 22 minutes of news, 8 minutes of programming. It's tough to police all those 8 minutes. It's tough with new ads being generated on a weekly basis. By the time one gets sort of like pulled down for cause, they've got another one in the hopper.
Okay. Interesting. Here's another question from Deborah. We didn't show any of these ads, but we are certainly aware of them. She asks, any thoughts from the panel about the ads we're seeing from the Lincoln Project? And if just a reminder to people, that's the Republican-led ads that's against Trump. And And then as a follow-up to that question, are ads from PACs effective compared to maybe the candidate ads? So anyone have a thought on that? Ann, did you have?
I think that ads, if you're going to do negative advertising, I think they're more effective if they're not coming from the opponent. I think that that's, whether these ads have been effective, have they been moving traditional Republican voters to vote for Biden? Maybe a little bit, but it might get them to think about it. But I don't know if they're actually, when they're going to go into that voting booth or mail in their ballot, if it's going to actually, they're actually going to be following through with it. So it's a big thing to get somebody to vote across party lines from what they're used to voting.
Yes.
I mean,
what I found most interesting, sorry, Toby, what I found most interesting about the Lincoln Project is it takes advantage of there being almost a negligible cost of entry to put an ad together, because what the Lincoln Project is able to do is use the editing software that you could find on your iPhone and put something together in 10 hours that used to take Toby 10 weeks or 10 days to put together. So, and what they're so agile, and they can get these things up while the news cycle is still out there about the president talking about person, woman, man, camera, TV. They've already got an ad out there. But in terms of the point about, is this really going to sway anybody? No, but I do think it makes people feel better about the decisions that they've already made, or it makes people feel vindicated about the decisions that they've made, and maybe it gooses them out the door to cast the vote. They do come across as smug to me sometimes, and I do think that they've crossed the line.
These are a big hit with the Morning Joe crowd. If you're going to go out, well, now you can't go out for drinks in Georgetown, but if you did, they'd be comping you drink after drink. Aren't you a wonderful hero? But I have an article that actually was from Vanity Fair, of all places, that says these ads are probably not very effective because they're not talking to the people that need to be talked to. And what they did this huge survey of all sorts of voters who you do need to talk to. And what they want is more optimistic. They want simple facts. They want figures. They want regular people, at least for the ones who you probably should be persuading now. To me, what the Lincoln Project does is the same mistake that the Hillary Project did 4 years ago, which is wailing away on Donald Trump. Everybody already knows all these things. And so, it's like, okay, well, that's fun, but it's not necessarily going to help you get whatever's left of the swing voters.
Yeah, if you're looking at a Republican group that's actually doing effective ads, I look at the Republican Voters Against Trump. They've done a lot of good, especially digital ads. Generally speaking, on the question about the effectiveness of PAC ads, in some of the work that I've done, I've seen that if you're not making an explicit call to vote against a person and you're arguing on an issue, then that can actually be more resonant with voters and then lead to the same outcome, perhaps. And on Toby's point on the survey about what people are actually looking for, people say what they like, but they actually remember the negative ads more often, and that's just a fact of human psychology, I suppose.
Great, thank you, Chris. And we've reached, unfortunately, the end of our hour together, so we're gonna have to call it on the questions. I thank all the registrants for attending today's virtual event. I want to thank the panel especially. It's with a great panel. Thank you again, Chris, Matthew, Ann, and Toby, and for shedding a little light on the dark arts of political advertising. I'd like to leave everybody with a little ad of my own. Just a final reminder, our next event in our ComTalk series is The Power of Purpose, How to Move Your Organization and Your Career Forward. It's co-sponsored by COM's Committee for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It's 1 week from today, October 21st at 3 p.m. You can register as usual from the COM website at bu.edu/com/calendar. Thank you all for attending today's event, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you all on the tarmac.